The dust from the stagecoach still hung in the air when Gabriel Vaughn heard his 7-year-old son Tommy ask the question that would change everything. "Papa, why is that lady crying?" The boy's voice carried across the quiet main street of Lone Pine, California, cutting through the afternoon heat of June 1882 like a knife through butter. Gabriel looked up from where he was adjusting his saddle, his weathered hand stilling as his eyes found the woman sitting on the steps of the general store, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Without hesitation, he swung himself back onto his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Bess, and clicked his tongue. "Stay here with Uncle Frank, Tommy," he said softly, already moving toward the distressed woman. As he approached, he could see the fine fabric of her traveling dress now covered in dust, the feathered hat askew on her dark hair, and a torn carpet bag lying at her feet with its contents scattered across the wooden planks. He dismounted with practiced ease, his boots hitting the ground with a solid thud that made her look up. Her eyes were the color of spring grass, bright and alive despite the tears streaking through the dust on her cheeks. And in that moment, Gabriel Vaughn felt something shift in his chest, something he had not felt since his wife Mary had died 3 years prior. "Madam," he said, removing his hat and holding it respectfully against his chest, "I could not help but notice you seemed to be in some distress." His voice was gentle, the same tone he used when calming spooked horses or comforting his son after a nightmare. The woman looked up at him, her green eyes meeting his brown ones, and for a moment she seemed unable to speak. Then, as if a dam had broken, the words came tumbling out in a rush. "The stage," she gasped between sobs. "They took everything. My money, my jewelry, the deed to my aunt's property. Everything except this torn bag and the clothes on my back. I came all the way from Boston to claim my inheritance, and now I have nothing. Nothing." Her voice broke on the last word, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Gabriel felt his jaw tighten with anger at the thought of outlaws preying on a lone woman, but he kept his voice calm and steady. "Not anymore," he said simply, the words coming out with such quiet conviction that the woman stopped crying and stared at him. "You are not alone, and you are not without help. My name is Gabriel Vaughn, and I give you my word that we will sort this out." The woman blinked at him, confusion and hope warring in her expression. "But you do not even know me," she whispered. "Why would you help a stranger?" Gabriel replaced his hat on his head and extended his hand to help her stand. "Because that is what decent folks do out here, madam. We take care of each other. Now, what is your name, and when did this robbery occur?" She took his hand, her fingers small and delicate in his calloused palm, and allowed him to help her to her feet. "Eleanor Mitchell," she said, her voice steadier now. "The stage was held up about 5 miles north of here maybe 2 hours ago. There were 3 men, all masked. They took my trunk with all my belongings, my reticule with my money and papers. They left me with just this." She gestured helplessly at the torn carpet bag. Gabriel nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. 5 miles north 2 hours ago. They probably headed up into the foothills, thinking to lay low until nightfall. Did you notice anything distinctive about them? Their horses, their voices, anything at all? Eleanor closed her eyes, clearly trying to recall details through her panic and fear. "One of them had a distinctive laugh," she said slowly. "High-pitched, almost like a cackle. And another had a scar on his hand. I saw it when he grabbed my reticule, a long white scar running from his thumb to his wrist." Gabriel felt a cold recognition settle in his gut. "The Garrett brothers," he said grimly. "They have been working this stretch of road for the past month. The sheriff has been trying to catch them, but they are slippery as eels." He turned and called over his shoulder to where his brother Frank was standing with Tommy. "Frank, take Tommy back to the ranch. I have some business to attend to." Frank, a shorter, stockier version of Gabriel with the same dark hair and brown eyes, walked over with Tommy in tow. "What kind of business?" he asked, his eyes flicking between Gabriel and Eleanor with obvious curiosity. The Garrett brothers hit the stage again. I am going after them. Frank's eyebrows shot up. "Alone, Gabriel, that is foolish. Let me come with you." But Gabriel shook his head. "Someone needs to look after Tommy, and I need you to take Miss Mitchell here back to the ranch. Get her settled in the guest room. She will be staying with us until this gets sorted out." Eleanor's eyes widened. "I could not possibly impose like that," she protested. "Surely there is a hotel in town where I could stay." Gabriel looked at her squarely. "With what money, Miss Mitchell? You just said the outlaws took everything. And yes, there is a hotel, but it is not the kind of place a respectable woman should stay. My ranch is 3 miles outside of town, and you will be safe there with Frank and my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen. I promise you that." Eleanor bit her lip, clearly torn between pride and practicality. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. I will repay your kindness as soon as I am able to access my aunt's estate." Gabriel was already moving back toward his horse, checking his rifle and the revolver at his hip. "We can worry about repayment later. Right now, I need to catch those thieves before they get too far or sell off your belongings." He swung back into the saddle with fluid grace, settling into the familiar leather with the ease of a man who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. Tommy ran up to him, his small face creased with worry. "Papa, be careful," the boy said, his voice trembling slightly. Gabriel reached down and ruffled his son's sandy hair, so like his mother's had been. "Always sport. You mind your uncle and help Miss Eleanor get settled, you hear? Show her around the ranch, introduce her to the animals." Tommy nodded solemnly, then turned to look at Eleanor with open curiosity. "Are you really from Boston?" he asked. "That is where they had the tea party, right? Uncle Frank told me about it." Despite everything, Eleanor found herself smiling at the earnest little boy. "Yes, I am from Boston. And yes, that is where the Boston Tea Party happened, though that was a very long time ago before either of us were born." Gabriel felt that strange tightening in his chest again as he watched his son and Eleanor interact. There was something about the way she smiled at Tommy, genuine and warm, despite her own troubles, that made him want to recover her belongings all the more. "I will be back before nightfall," he promised, meeting Eleanor's eyes. "Frank will take good care of you." Then he was gone, urging Bess into a gallop that sent dust flying as he headed north out of town. Eleanor watched him go, one hand raised to shield her eyes from the sun, and felt an odd mixture of gratitude and something else she could not quite name. This tall, weathered cowboy with kind eyes and a quiet confidence had appeared like something out of a dime novel, offering help when she had been at her lowest point. She turned to find Frank watching her with an amused expression. "My brother is a good man," he said simply. "If anyone can get your things back, it is Gabriel. Now, let us get you out of this heat and back to the ranch. You look like you could use a cool drink and a chance to wash up." The ride to the Vaughn ranch gave Eleanor her first real look at the landscape of the Owens Valley. The Sierra Nevada mountains rose up to the west, their peaks still capped with snow despite the June heat, while to the east the Inyo Mountains formed a lower, drier barrier. The valley itself was a patchwork of ranches and farms, green where irrigation from the Owens River reached, brown and scrubby everywhere else. It was so different from Boston, from the narrow streets and brick buildings and the constant press of people. Here, the sky seemed impossibly vast, and the silence was broken only by the clip-clop of the horse's hooves and Tommy's excited chatter as he pointed out various landmarks. "That is where Papa found the calf that got separated from its mama," the boy said, pointing to a cluster of rocks. "And over there is where I caught my first fish in the creek. Papa says I am getting real good at fishing, almost as good as him." Eleanor found herself genuinely interested despite her worries. "How long have you lived here, Tommy?" she asked. The boy scrunched up his face in thought. "All my life, I think. Papa says we came here when I was just a baby, after Mama died having me." Frank shot his nephew a quick glance, then looked apologetically at Eleanor. "The boy does not quite understand," he said quietly. "Mary, Gabriel's wife. She died from complications 3 days after Tommy was born. Gabriel sold his business back in Sacramento and moved out here, said he needed space and fresh air to clear his head and raise his son right. That was 7 years ago, and he has built one of the best horse ranches in the valley in that time." Eleanor felt her heart clench with sympathy. So Gabriel Vaughn was a widower, raising his son alone except for the help of his brother. That explained the gentle way he had approached her, the understanding in his eyes when he saw her distress. He knew what it was like to face loss and hardship. "I am sorry for your loss," she said softly to Tommy, who shrugged with the resilience of a child who had never known any different. "It is okay," he said matter-of-factly. "Papa says Mama is watching over us from heaven and that she would be proud of the man I am growing up to be." The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise, and Eleanor caught her breath. It was larger than she had expected, a sturdy 2-story structure built of wood and stone with a wide porch wrapping around the front and side. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, a stable, a chicken coop, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Horses grazed in multiple corrals, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun, and she could see a vegetable garden near the house, well tended and lush. "Gabriel built most of this himself," Frank said with obvious pride. "He has a good eye for horses, breeds and trains them for sale all over California and Nevada. We have 3 ranch hands who help with the daily work, but Gabriel still does most of the training personally. Says it is important to know each animal, understand their temperament." They rode up to the hitching post near the house, and as they dismounted, the front door opened to reveal a small, sturdy Chinese woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Mr. Frank," she said, her English accented but clear, "who is this you bring home, and where is Mr. Gabriel?" Frank helped Eleanor down from the horse, steadying her when she stumbled slightly on legs still shaky from the day's ordeal. "This is Miss Eleanor Mitchell, Mrs. Chen. She had some trouble on the stage from Bishop, and Gabriel has gone to sort it out. She will be staying in the guest room for a spell. Can you get her some water and maybe draw a bath? She has had a rough day." Mrs. Chen's stern expression softened as she took in Eleanor's disheveled appearance and tear-stained face. Of course. Come, Miss Mitchell. You look ready to drop. I get you water, food, bath, clean clothes. Everything will be better after you rest." Eleanor found herself being shepherded into the house with surprising gentleness, and she looked back over her shoulder to see Frank already leading the horses toward the stable while Tommy followed, chattering away about something. Inside, the house was cool and dimly lit after the bright sunshine, and Eleanor had an impression of solid, comfortable furniture, woven rugs on the wooden floors, and framed photographs on the walls. Mrs. Chen led her upstairs to a pleasant room with a large bed covered in a handmade quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and windows that looked out over the corrals toward the mountains. "You sit," Mrs. Chen commanded, pointing at the bed. "I bring water, then prepare bath. You have any injuries I should know about?" Eleanor sank onto the bed gratefully, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. "No injuries," she said. "Just bruised and shaken. The outlaws did not hurt me physically, they just took everything and left me stranded." Mrs. Chen made a disgusted sound. "Bad men," she said emphatically. "But Mr. Gabriel will catch them. He always catch the bad ones. You rest now." She bustled out, and Eleanor found herself alone for the first time since the robbery. The emotions she had been holding back threatened to overwhelm her again, but she forced herself to take deep, steady breaths. She would not fall apart, not now. She had come to California to start a new life, to claim the property her aunt had left her, and she would not let a setback like this defeat her, no matter how frightening it had been. Her Aunt Josephine had been her father's sister, a woman who had scandalized Boston society by moving west after her husband died, refusing to return east and live with relatives. She had written Eleanor long, fascinating letters about life in California, about the mountains and the desert and the freedom of the open spaces. When word came 6 months ago that Aunt Josephine had died and left Eleanor her small ranch near Lone Pine, Eleanor had seen it as a sign. She was 23 years old, unmarried and living in her parents' house while teaching at a girls' school. Her parents had died in a fire 2 years earlier, and she had no siblings, no close family left in Boston. The idea of starting fresh in California had been both terrifying and exhilarating. She had spent months preparing for the journey, selling her parents' house and most of their belongings, keeping only what she could fit in a trunk and 2 carpet bags. The train journey west had been long but uneventful, and she had been full of hope and excitement when she boarded the stage in Bishop for the final leg of her journey to Lone Pine. Then everything had gone wrong. The stage had been climbing a rocky stretch of road when the 3 masked riders had appeared, guns drawn, ordering the driver to stop. The other passengers, a salesman and an elderly couple, had been robbed too, but Eleanor had been carrying everything she owned in the world. Her money, her important papers, her mother's jewelry, the deed to her aunt's property, all of it was in that trunk or in her leather reticule. The outlaws had been rough but efficient, taking what they wanted and riding off within minutes. The driver had brought them into Lone Pine, expressing regret, but saying there was nothing he could do. The elderly couple had been met by family. The salesman had stormed off muttering about incompetence, and Eleanor had been left sitting on those steps, overwhelmed by the realization that she was stranded in a strange town with literally nothing but the clothes on her back and a torn carpet bag containing a hairbrush, a book, and a change of undergarments. Then Gabriel Vaughn had appeared, like an answer to a prayer she had not even known she was praying. There had been something in his eyes, a steadiness and kindness that had made her trust him instantly, despite her usual caution around strangers. Mrs. Chen returned with a pitcher of cold water and a glass, followed by Tommy carrying a plate of bread, cheese, and sliced apples. "Mrs. Chen says you need to eat," the boy announced importantly. "She says you are too skinny and need meat on your bones." Eleanor could not help but laugh, the first genuine laugh since the robbery. "Does she indeed?" she said, taking the plate gratefully. "Well, please tell Mrs. Chen thank you, and that I think her assessment is probably correct." Tommy beamed at her, clearly pleased to have made her laugh. "Papa says Mrs. Chen is the best cook in the whole valley, and that we are lucky she puts up with us. She has been here since Papa first bought the ranch. Her husband used to work on the railroad, but he died, and Papa gave her a job and a place to live." The boys' open, friendly chatter was oddly comforting, and Eleanor found herself relaxing slightly as she ate and drank. The food was simple but good, and she realized she had not eaten since early morning. Mrs. Chen had disappeared again, and Eleanor could hear the sound of water being hauled and poured. True to her word, the housekeeper prepared a bath in a small room down the hall, and Eleanor sank into the warm water with a sigh of profound relief. The dust and grime of the journey washed away, and with it some of her fear and anxiety. She washed her hair with the soap provided, working her fingers through the tangles, and allowed herself to simply sit and soak until the water began to cool. When she emerged, wrapped in a robe that Mrs. Chen had provided, she found a simple but clean dress laid out on the bed, a bit worn but serviceable. It was too big for her, and Eleanor guessed it had probably belonged to Gabriel's late wife. The thought gave her a strange feeling, putting on a dead woman's dress, but she had no other choice. Her traveling dress was filthy and torn, and everything else she owned was in the hands of outlaws. She dressed quickly, rolling up the sleeves and taking in the waist as best she could with a belt Mrs. Chen had thoughtfully included. Her own boots were still serviceable, so she put those back on, then sat down to comb out her wet hair. There was a mirror above the dresser, and Eleanor studied her reflection critically. She had always been told she was pretty, with her dark hair, green eyes, and fine features, but she had never put much stock in her appearance. What good was being pretty when you had a mind that wanted to read and learn and do more than just make a good match with a suitable husband? That had been part of the problem in Boston. The men who courted her were either intimidated by her intelligence or dismissive of it, wanting a wife who would be decorative and obedient. Eleanor wanted more than that. She wanted partnership, respect, intellectual companionship. She had thought perhaps in the West, where things were different and more informal, she might find what she was looking for. Or perhaps she would simply focus on building a life for herself on her aunt's ranch, prove that a woman could manage land and livestock just as well as any man. Of course, that plan rather depended on actually getting access to her property, and without the deed and without funds, she was in a difficult position. She would have to go to the land office in town and try to prove her identity and her claim, but that would take time, and in the meantime, she was dependent on the charity of strangers. Of Gabriel Vaughn, who had ridden off without a second thought to recover her belongings from dangerous outlaws. Eleanor found herself wondering about him as she braided her damp hair. He was older than her, probably in his early 30s, with the weathered, sun-browned skin of a man who spent his life outdoors. He was tall and lean, built like a man who did hard physical work every day, with strong hands and an easy competence in everything he did. But it was his eyes that had struck her, dark and kind, full of understanding when he looked at her crying on those steps. And the way he had spoken to her, with respect and gentleness, promising to help without asking anything in return. She had met few men like that in her life, and certainly none who had made her feel so immediately safe and cared for. She shook her head at her own foolishness. She had known the man for all of 2 hours, and here she was thinking about him like some silly girl with a crush. It was gratitude, nothing more. He was helping her because he was a good man, not because there was any particular connection between them. Once he recovered her things and she got settled on her aunt's property, she would probably rarely see him. Lone Pine was a small town, but not that small. She could live her own life, and he could live his, and that would be that. Except even as she thought it, Eleanor knew she was lying to herself. There had been something in that moment when their eyes met, something electric and undeniable. She had felt it, and unless she was very much mistaken, he had felt it too. The sun was lowering toward the western mountains when Eleanor finally ventured downstairs, drawn by the smell of cooking food and the sound of voices. She found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, a large, well-equipped room with a cast-iron stove, a long work table, and shelves full of supplies. Tommy was sitting at the table, playing with carved wooden animals, and Frank was leaning against the counter, drinking coffee. They all looked up when she entered. "Miss Mitchell," Frank said, straightening. "You are looking much better. Did you get some rest?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes, thank you. And please call me Eleanor. After everything you have done for me, formality seems rather silly." Frank smiled, and she could see the family resemblance to Gabriel in his expression. "Eleanor it is, then, and you should call me Frank. We are not much for standing on ceremony out here. Mrs. Chen pointed to the table with a wooden spoon. "Sit," she commanded. "Dinner is almost ready. Mr. Gabriel will be back soon, I think. He knows better than to miss my cooking." Eleanor sat obediently, and Tommy immediately scooted his chair closer to her. "Do you want to play?" he asked, holding up a carved horse. "I have a whole ranch of animals. Papa made them for me." Eleanor took the horse, admiring the careful workmanship. "Your papa made this. It is beautifully done." Tommy nodded proudly. "Papa is really good at carving. He makes things when he sits on the porch at night. He says it helps him think." They played together for a while, Tommy creating elaborate scenarios with his wooden animals while Eleanor followed his lead, and she found herself truly relaxing for the first time all day. The child was sweet and imaginative, and there was something healing about his innocent chatter and easy acceptance of her presence. Frank watched them with an approving expression. "Tommy does not usually take to strangers so quickly," he observed. "But then, my nephew has always been a good judge of character, just like his father." Eleanor was about to respond when she heard the sound of horses outside, followed by boots on the porch. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she looked at Frank with wide eyes. "Is that Gabriel?" He was already moving toward the door. "Sounds like it, and unless I miss my guess, he has company." The door opened, and Gabriel stepped inside, looking dusty and tired but triumphant. Behind him came the town sheriff, a grizzled man with a silver star pinned to his vest, and behind the sheriff, two ranch hands leading horses laden with recovered goods. "Papa!" Tommy launched himself at his father, who caught him and swung him up with a tired but genuine smile. "Hey there, sport. Did you behave yourself while I was gone?" Tommy nodded vigorously. "I showed Eleanor all my animals and helped Mrs. Chen set the table and everything." Gabriel's eyes found Eleanor over his son's head, and his smile widened. "I am glad to hear it." He set Tommy down and gestured to the sheriff. "Eleanor, this is Sheriff Tom Daniels. Sheriff, this is Miss Eleanor Mitchell, the lady who was robbed on the stage today." The sheriff removed his hat, revealing sparse gray hair. "Madam," he said with a nod, "I am pleased to tell you that Mr. Vaughn here tracked down the Garrett brothers and recovered your belongings. All three of them are now cooling their heels in my jail, and they will face trial within the week." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. "You got everything back?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. Gabriel nodded. "Your trunk, your reticule, everything. We found them holed up in an old line shack up in the foothills, dividing up their take. They were not expecting anyone to come after them so quickly. The sheriff and I had a little discussion with them about their choices in life, and they decided it was in their best interest to come along peacefully." There was a dry humor in his tone that made Eleanor suspect the discussion had involved more than just words, but she did not care. Her belongings were back, which meant she had her money, her papers, the deed to her property. She could move forward with her plans, could claim her inheritance and start her new life. She stood up quickly, almost knocking over her chair in her haste. "Mr. Vaughn, I do not know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have done so much for me, a complete stranger. I will never forget your kindness." Gabriel waved off her thanks, looking almost embarrassed. "Any decent man would have done the same," he said. And please call me Gabriel. We saved your life and your future today. I reckon that puts us past formalities." The ranch hands brought her trunk and carpet bags inside, setting them carefully near the stairs, and the sheriff prepared to take his leave. "I will need you to come into town tomorrow, Miss Mitchell, to identify your belongings officially and to give a statement about the robbery," he said. "Just a formality but necessary for the trial." Eleanor nodded. "Of course, Sheriff. I will be there." After the sheriff left, Mrs. Chen shooed everyone to the table, declaring that dinner was ready and would not wait for anyone. They all sat down to a meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, vegetables from the garden, and fresh bread, and Eleanor ate with genuine appetite, the food tasting better than anything she had had in weeks. The conversation flowed easily, with Tommy chattering about his day, Frank teasing his brother about his tracking skills, and Mrs. Chen interjecting sharp comments from where she moved between the table and the stove. Eleanor found herself laughing genuinely, feeling more at home than she had since leaving Boston. Gabriel sat at the head of the table, and she caught him watching her several times with an expression she could not quite read. After dinner, Tommy was sent reluctantly to bed, and Frank excused himself to check on the horses one last time. Mrs. Chen began clearing the dishes, waving off Eleanor's offer to help. "You have had enough for one day," the housekeeper said firmly. "Mr. Gabriel will show you to your room and make sure you have everything you need." Gabriel stood, looking suddenly uncertain in a way he had not been all day. "Would you like to sit on the porch for a bit?" he asked. "It is a pleasant evening, and I find I am too keyed up to sleep just yet." Eleanor nodded, following him outside to the wide porch. The sun had set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the air was cooling quickly. Gabriel gestured to a pair of rocking chairs, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. "I want you to know that what you did today was extraordinary," Eleanor said finally, breaking the silence. "Tracking those men, recovering my belongings, all of it. You risked your own safety for someone you had just met." Gabriel shrugged, his hands resting on the arms of the chair. "It needed doing," he said simply. "Those men have been terrorizing travelers on that road for weeks. The sheriff and his deputies have been spread too thin to catch them properly. I just happen to know the country well enough to guess where they would hole up." Eleanor turned in her chair to face him more directly. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "And please, do not say it is what anyone would do, because we both know that is not true. The stage driver brought me into town and left me on those steps. Other people walked past without offering help, but you stopped. You saw me crying and you stopped. Why?" Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the darkening mountains. When he spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. "When my wife Mary died, I was in a very dark place," he said. "I had a newborn son, a business to run, and I was drowning in grief. A stranger helped me then, an old rancher named John Cassidy. He saw me struggling and he just stepped in, showed me how to care for Tommy, taught me about ranching, gave me the push I needed to move out here and start over. He died 2 years ago, but I promised him I would pay his kindness forward, that I would help others the way he helped me." Eleanor felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I am sorry about your wife," she said softly. "Tommy is a wonderful boy. She would be proud." Gabriel smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "I hope so. It has been just the three of us for a long time, me and Tommy and Frank. Mrs. Chen too, of course. We have made a good life here, but sometimes I wonder if Tommy is missing out, not having a mother, not having a woman's influence in his life beyond Mrs. Chen." Eleanor did not know what to say to that, so she simply sat with him in the gathering darkness, feeling an unexpected sense of peace. Despite everything that had happened today, despite being robbed and stranded and utterly lost, she felt safer and more at ease than she had in months. Finally, Gabriel stood, stretching out his back with an audible crack. "You should get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we can go into town together, sort out your business with the sheriff and the land office. I know the clerk there, and he can help you process your claim quickly." Eleanor stood as well. "I do not want to take up more of your time," she protested. "You have already done so much." Gabriel looked at her, his brown eyes warm in the light spilling from the windows. "Eleanor," he said, using her given name for the first time, and the sound of it on his lips sent a small shiver through her. "I want to help. Please let me." She nodded, unable to find words past the sudden lump in her throat. "Thank you," she managed finally, "for everything." He reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder, a brief touch that seemed to burn through the fabric of her borrowed dress. "Get some sleep," he said again. "Tomorrow is a new day, and things always look better in the morning." Eleanor went upstairs to the guest room, her mind whirling with thoughts and emotions she could not quite sort through. She changed into a nightgown Mrs. Chen had provided, brushed out her hair, and climbed into the comfortable bed. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, more stars than she had ever seen in Boston, where the city lights drowned them out. She thought about Gabriel, about his quiet strength and his kindness, about the way he had looked at her over dinner and the gentle touch of his hand on her shoulder. She thought about his son, sweet and open and clearly hungry for female attention and affection. She thought about this ranch, this life that was so different from anything she had known, and she felt something stirring in her heart, something that felt almost like hope. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Eleanor woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. She dressed in one of her own dresses, retrieved from her trunk, and felt more like herself as she went down to breakfast. The household was already awake and busy, with Frank and the ranch hands heading out to work with the horses, Tommy eating porridge at the kitchen table, and Mrs. Chen bustling around preparing food. Gabriel looked up when Eleanor entered, and his face broke into a smile that made her heart skip a beat. "Morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." Eleanor nodded, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Chen with a grateful smile. "I did, thank you. Better than I have in weeks, actually." Gabriel finished his own breakfast and stood. "Whenever you are ready, we can head into town. I have the wagon hitched and ready to go." They left soon after, with Tommy begging to come along and Gabriel finally agreeing after the boy promised to behave himself. The ride into Lone Pine was pleasant, with Tommy keeping up a steady stream of questions and observations that made both adults laugh. The town was busier this morning, with people going about their daily business, and Eleanor saw it with fresh eyes now that she was not in the depths of despair. The sheriff's office was their first stop, and Eleanor gave her official statement about the robbery while Gabriel waited outside with Tommy. Sheriff Daniels was efficient and professional, and he assured her that the Garrett brothers would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. "We have been trying to catch them for weeks," he said. "Thanks to Mr. Vaughn, we finally have them dead to rights. They will be going to prison for a long time." Next, they went to the land office, a small building near the general store. The clerk, a balding man named Herbert Morrison, greeted Gabriel warmly and listened attentively as Eleanor explained her situation. "Your Aunt Josephine was a fine woman," Morrison said, pulling out files from a large cabinet. "She homesteaded that property back in '76, built it up into a nice little ranch. Ran cattle mostly, and had a good vegetable garden. She was something of a legend around here, truth be told. Not many women manage land on their own like she did. He found the relevant papers and spread them on his desk. The property is about 8 miles north of town, at the base of the foothills. 160 acres with a house, a barn, a good well, and water rights to a creek that runs through the northern section. It was all filed properly in her will, leaving everything to her niece Eleanor Mitchell of Boston, Massachusetts. Eleanor felt a thrill of excitement and nervousness. This was real. She actually owned land, a ranch, a home. "How soon can I take possession?" she asked. Morrison shuffled papers. "Well, technically, you already own it. We just need to file the deed transfer, which I can do right now. You will need to pay the filing fee and the property taxes that are due." He named a figure that made Eleanor wince slightly, but it was manageable with the money she had recovered. She paid the fees, signed the necessary papers, and within an hour, she was officially the owner of the Mitchell Ranch. Gabriel had been waiting outside, letting her handle her business privately, but when she emerged with the deed in hand and a dazed expression on her face, he grinned. "You got it?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, still trying to absorb the reality. "I got it. I own a ranch. I have never even seen it, and I own it." Gabriel put a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Well then, I reckon we should go see it. That is, if you would like company." Eleanor looked at him, at this man who had already helped her so much, and felt a rush of gratitude and something deeper. "I would like that very much," she said. They stopped to buy supplies at the general store, with Gabriel advising Eleanor on what she would need to get the ranch up and running again. "Morrison said the place has been sitting empty for 6 months since your aunt passed," Gabriel explained as they loaded supplies into the wagon. "The house is probably dusty and might need some repairs, but the structure should be sound. Josephine built well. You will need to check the well, make sure the pump is still working, and assess the fences and the barn. If you are planning to run cattle or horses, you will need stock, which is a significant investment." Eleanor felt slightly overwhelmed by all the practical considerations she had not fully thought through. She had money, but not an unlimited amount, and she had no real experience with ranching. What had she been thinking, moving out here to run a ranch on her own? Gabriel must have seen the doubt creeping into her expression because he touched her arm gently. "Hey," he said softly, "you do not have to figure it all out today. One step at a time, remember. Let us go see the place, assess what needs doing, and then we can make a plan." Eleanor took a deep breath and nodded. "You are right. One step at a time." The ride north out of town took them through some of the prettiest country Eleanor had seen yet. The road followed the line of the mountains, with the creek Morrison had mentioned running parallel to it for much of the way. They passed several other ranches, and Gabriel pointed out neighbors and explained the local geography. "That is the Sullivan place," he said, gesturing to a neat ranch with whitewashed fences. "They run sheep mostly. Good people. And over there is where the Browns live. They have a son about Tommy's age." Tommy piped up from where he was sitting between them on the wagon seat. "I go to school with Jimmy Brown. He is my best friend. We are going to be cowboys together when we grow up." Eleanor smiled. "That sounds like a fine plan, Tommy." After about an hour, Gabriel turned the wagon off the main road onto a narrow track that led toward the foothills. "This should be it," he said. "Your aunt's property starts at that fence line." They followed the track through a stand of cottonwood trees and emerged into a clearing, and Eleanor caught her breath. There, nestled at the base of the foothills with the mountains rising dramatically behind it, was a small but sturdy ranch house. It was built of wood with a stone foundation and chimney, and had a covered porch across the front. The barn was about 50 yards from the house, a good-sized structure that looked solid despite peeling paint. There were corrals and fences, all needing repair, and the remnants of a vegetable garden gone to weeds. But the bones of the place were good, and the setting was absolutely beautiful. "Oh," Eleanor breathed. "It is perfect." Gabriel pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and jumped down, then turned to help Eleanor. His hands spanned her waist as he lifted her down, and for a moment they stood very close, his hands lingering on her waist and her hands resting on his shoulders. Their eyes met, and Eleanor felt that electric connection again, stronger this time. Then Tommy was clamoring to be let down, and the moment broke. Gabriel released her and turned to help his son, but Eleanor could see a faint flush on his sun-brown cheeks. They approached the house together, and Gabriel tested the door. It was locked, and Eleanor realized she did not have a key. "Morrison would have it," Gabriel said, "but I reckon we can get in through a window if you want to see inside today." Eleanor nodded, and Gabriel went around to the side of the house, returning a moment later. "Window was unlocked. Give me a minute." He disappeared inside, and shortly the front door opened. "Welcome home," he said with a smile, gesturing for her to enter. Eleanor stepped over the threshold into her new home, and felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly brought tears to her eyes. The inside was dim with the shutters closed, and dust motes danced in the shafts of light coming through cracks. Gabriel moved through the house, opening shutters and windows, letting light and fresh air flood in. The main room was a combination kitchen and living area, with a cast-iron stove, a table and chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, and shelves built into the walls. There was a bedroom on the ground floor and a ladder leading up to a loft space. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. "It needs cleaning," Eleanor said, stating the obvious. Gabriel chuckled. "That it does. But the structure is sound, the roof looks good, and the stove seems to be in working order. You have a good foundation here, Eleanor. With some work, this will be a fine home." They spent the next hour exploring the property, with Gabriel making notes of what needed doing. The well worked, which was a relief, though the pump needed some oil. The barn was sound but needed mucking out and fresh straw. The fences all needed mending, and the corrals needed reinforcement. The vegetable garden was a lost cause for this season but could be replanted next spring. "If you want to run stock, you will need to decide what kind," Gabriel said as they stood in the barn, looking at the empty stalls. "Cattle, horses, sheep, even goats. Each has advantages and disadvantages. Cattle are profitable but need more land and more hands to manage. Horses are what I do, and I could help you get started if that is what you want. Sheep are good, but you would need to hire a shepherd, and not everyone around here likes sheep ranchers. There is some bad blood over grazing rights." Eleanor looked around the barn, trying to imagine it full of animals, full of life. "I think I would like to try horses," she said slowly, "if you would be willing to help me learn. I rode when I was younger in Boston, but I have no experience with breeding or training." Gabriel's face lit up. "I would be happy to help. More than happy. I could sell you some horses from my stock to start, good breeding animals, and teach you the basics. You would need to hire at least one hand to help with the daily work, someone who knows horses. I might know someone who would be interested." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked. "You barely know me, and yet you are offering to help me set up a competing business." Gabriel looked at her for a long moment, his expression serious. "I do not see you as competition, Eleanor. I see you as someone who needs help, and as someone I want to get to know better. Much better, if I am being honest." Eleanor's breath caught. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? Before she could respond, Tommy came running into the barn, his face flushed with excitement. "Papa, there is a family of rabbits living under the porch. I saw them. Can Miss Eleanor keep them? They are so cute." The moment was broken, and Gabriel smiled down at his son. "I imagine Miss Eleanor will let the rabbits live wherever they want, sport. It is her property after all." Over the next few weeks, Eleanor settled into a routine that involved working on her ranch during the day and often having dinner at Gabriel's place in the evening. He had been true to his word, helping her hire a ranch hand named Samuel Peterson, a quiet man in his 50s who knew horses inside and out. Together, they cleaned out the barn, mended fences, and prepared the property to receive stock. Gabriel sold her 6 horses at a very fair price, 3 mares and 3 geldings, all good quality animals with excellent bloodlines. He spent hours teaching her about horse care, training techniques, and the business side of horse ranching. Eleanor was a quick learner, and she threw herself into the work with determination. Her hands, which had been soft from her life as a teacher in Boston, became calloused and strong. Her skin, which had been pale, turned golden from the sun despite her best efforts with bonnets and long sleeves. She learned to ride astride instead of side saddle, finding it much more practical for ranch work. She learned to repair tack, to judge a horse's health by looking at its eyes and coat, to understand the difference between good conformation and bad. But more than that, she was falling in love with Gabriel Vaughn. It happened gradually, and then all at once, in the way he smiled at her when she finally managed to get a stubborn horse to respond to commands, in the way he always made sure she had water when they worked together in the hot sun, in the way he talked to her as an equal, respecting her opinions and her intelligence. She loved the way he was with Tommy, patient and loving but firm when needed. She loved the way he carved wooden animals on the porch in the evening, his strong hands moving with surprising delicacy. She loved his quiet strength, his integrity, the way he treated everyone with respect regardless of their station in life. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her heart race, and she knew he felt the same pull she did. But neither of them spoke of it directly, both perhaps afraid to disturb the easy friendship that had developed between them. 2 months after Eleanor had arrived in Lone Pine, Gabriel invited her and Samuel to join his outfit for a trip into the high country to round up some of his horses that had been left to graze for the summer. It would be a 3-day trip, he explained, camping out under the stars. Frank would come along, as would Gabriel's 3 ranch hands, and they would need all the help they could get to gather the herd and bring them down safely. Eleanor agreed immediately, excited at the prospect of seeing more of the country and of spending more time with Gabriel, even if it would be in the company of others. Mrs. Chen would look after Tommy, who was deemed too young for such a rough trip. They set out early on a Monday morning in late August, riding up into the foothills as the sun climbed over the eastern mountains. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and sage, and Eleanor felt a sense of freedom and joy unlike anything she had known in Boston. They rode for hours, climbing higher and higher, the horses picking their way along rocky trails that sometimes seemed barely wide enough for a single rider. Gabriel rode at the head of the group with Eleanor at his side, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the country. By the time they made camp that first night, Eleanor was sore and exhausted but exhilarated. They had found a good spot near a stream, with grass for the horses and shelter from the wind. The men efficiently set up camp, building a fire and preparing a simple meal of beans, bacon, and coffee. After dinner, they sat around the fire, and Frank pulled out a harmonica, playing old songs that the others joined in on with rough but enthusiastic voices. Eleanor found herself singing along, songs she had learned as a child, and Gabriel's deep voice blending with hers on the choruses. Later, After the others had rolled into their bedrolls, Eleanor sat by the dying fire, reluctant to sleep despite her exhaustion. Gabriel came and sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You did well today," he said quietly. "You have come a long way from the crying woman on the steps in Lone Pine." Eleanor smiled. "That feels like a lifetime ago," she admitted. "I feel like a completely different person now." Gabriel picked up a stick and poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up into the night sky. "You are different," he said. "Stronger, more confident, but the core of who you are, that has not changed. You were always strong, Eleanor. You just had to find it in yourself." She looked at him, his face lit by the firelight, and felt her heart swell with emotion. "I could not have done any of this without you," she said. "You saved me, Gabriel, in more ways than one." He turned to look at her, his brown eyes intense. "You saved me too," he said softly. "I did not realize how closed off I had become, how much I was just going through the motions of living rather than actually living. Then you appeared, and everything changed. You made me want more, feel more." Eleanor's breath caught, and before she could think better of it, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "Gabriel," she whispered, but he shook his head. "Let me say this," he said. "I have been thinking about it for weeks, and I need you to know. I am falling in love with you, Eleanor. I think I started falling the moment I saw you on those steps, and every day since then has just made it stronger. I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but out here in this country, people do not have the luxury of long courtships. Life is hard and uncertain, and when you find something real, something worth holding on to, you grab it with both hands." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I am falling in love with you too," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude, just friendship, but I know it is more than that, so much more." Gabriel reached up and cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "May I kiss you?" he asked, and Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and perfect. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but then Eleanor leaned into it, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her palm. The kiss deepened, becoming something more passionate, and Eleanor felt like her entire body was singing with joy and desire. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this right, not rush things, but I need you to know my intentions are serious. I want a future with you, Eleanor. I want you to be part of my life, part of Tommy's life. I want us to build something together." Eleanor smiled through her tears. "I want that too," she said, "more than anything." They sat together by the fire until it burned down to embers, holding hands and talking quietly about their hopes and dreams, about the future they could build together. Finally, reluctantly, they separated to their respective bedrolls, but Eleanor lay awake for a long time, her lips still tingling from Gabriel's kiss, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The next 2 days of the roundup passed in a blur of hard work and stolen glances, of hands brushing accidentally, and smiles shared across the campfire. They found Gabriel's horses, about 30 head, and began the work of herding them down the mountain. It was challenging work, requiring skill and patience, and Eleanor acquitted herself well, earning nods of approval from the ranch hands who had been skeptical about having a woman along. On the 3rd day, as they were descending a particularly steep section of trail with the herd strung out below them, Eleanor's horse suddenly stumbled on loose rock. She felt herself sliding sideways out of the saddle, the ground rushing up to meet her, and then strong hands grabbed her, hauling her back onto her horse. Gabriel had somehow gotten his horse alongside hers in the narrow space, reaching out to steady her with a grip like iron. "I have got you," he said, his voice tight with fear and relief. "You are all right." Eleanor's heart was pounding, both from the near fall and from the feeling of Gabriel's arm around her waist, holding her secure. "Thank you," she gasped. "I do not know what happened, the horse just slipped." Gabriel kept his arm around her until they reached more level ground, and Eleanor did not protest. When they finally made it back to the valley and to Gabriel's ranch, they were greeted by an excited Tommy and a relieved Mrs. Chen. "You are back," Tommy shouted, running to meet them. "Did you get all the horses? Did you see any bears? Did Miss Eleanor do good?" Gabriel swung down from his horse and caught his son up in a hug. "We got all the horses, we did not see any bears, and yes, Miss Eleanor did very good. She is a natural horsewoman." Eleanor dismounted stiffly, every muscle in her body aching, but she smiled at Tommy's enthusiasm. "It was quite an adventure," she told the boy. "I saw country I never imagined existed, and your father taught me so much." Tommy beamed, then grabbed her hand. "Come see what I made while you were gone. Mrs. Chen helped me." He dragged her toward the house, chattering excitedly about a drawing he had done of horses and mountains. Eleanor followed, laughing, and looked back over her shoulder to see Gabriel watching her with an expression of such tenderness it made her catch her breath. Over the next few months, Gabriel courted Eleanor with old-fashioned respect and deliberation. He called on her at her ranch in the evenings, often bringing Tommy along, and they would sit on her porch and talk for hours. He brought her wildflowers picked from the meadows, and once, a book of poetry he had ordered from a catalog, knowing she loved to read. They went on rides through the countryside, sometimes alone and sometimes with Tommy between them on the saddle. He kissed her good night at the end of each visit, tender kisses that promised more but never pushed for more than she was ready to give. Eleanor found herself falling deeper in love with each passing day, and she could see that Tommy was growing attached to her as well. The boy started calling her Miss Ellie, and seeking her out for help with his schoolwork, and to share his small triumphs and concerns. The town of Lone Pine had taken notice of their courtship, and Eleanor was aware of the gossip and speculation. Some people thought it was too fast, that Gabriel should observe a longer mourning period for his late wife, even though 7 years had passed. Others thought it was wonderful, that Gabriel deserved happiness, and that Eleanor was a good match for him. Eleanor tried not to pay attention to the gossip, focusing instead on her growing relationship with Gabriel and on establishing herself as a respected rancher in the community. Her horse operation was beginning to show promise, with several people expressing interest in buying horses from her stock. Gabriel had helped her enter 2 of her horses in a regional show, and they had placed well, earning her some recognition and potential buyers. By October, Eleanor felt like she had truly found her place in the world. She loved her ranch, loved the work, loved the country, and most of all, loved Gabriel and Tommy. She could see a future stretching out before her, full of possibility and happiness, so different from the constrained life she had left behind in Boston. Then, one cool evening as the leaves were turning gold on the cottonwoods and the first hint of winter was in the air, Gabriel rode up to her ranch with a serious expression. Eleanor's heart sank. Had something happened? Was he having second thoughts? "Eleanor," he said, dismounting and taking her hands in his. "There is something I need to ask you, and I cannot wait any longer." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "I know we have not been courting for very long by Eastern standards, but out here, when you know, you know. You have brought life and light back into my world, into Tommy's world. You have made me remember what it is to hope for the future, to look forward to tomorrow. Eleanor Mitchell, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. Yes, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, Gabriel, I will marry you. I love you so much. Gabriel let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around as she laughed and cried at the same time. Then he was kissing her, deep and passionate, and Eleanor kissed him back with all the love and desire she had been holding in check for months. When they finally broke apart, Gabriel slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and Eleanor held up her hand, watching the diamond catch the late afternoon light. It was my grandmother's, Gabriel said. My mother gave it to me when I married Mary, and then after Mary died, she told me to keep it for when I found love again. I think she would be happy to know it is yours now. Eleanor threw her arms around his neck, holding him tight. I will treasure it always, she promised. And I will treasure you and Tommy. I promise to be the best wife and mother I can be. Gabriel pulled back to look at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. Tommy, he said, I have not told him yet. I wanted to ask you first, but I think he will be thrilled. He has been asking me when I am going to marry you so you can come live with us permanently. Eleanor laughed. Has he indeed? That boy is wise beyond his years. They decided to tell Tommy together the next day, inviting Eleanor to come to the Vaughn ranch for Sunday dinner. When she arrived, Tommy ran out to meet her as usual, and she and Gabriel sat him down in the living room. Tommy, Gabriel said, his hand finding Eleanor's and holding it tight. Miss Eleanor and I have something to tell you. I have asked her to marry me, and she said yes. How would you feel about Miss Eleanor becoming your new mama? Tommy's eyes went wide, and for a moment he was silent. Then his face broke into the biggest smile Eleanor had ever seen. Really? He asked, his voice squeaking with excitement. You are really going to be my mama? Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes again. If you will have me, she said softly. I would be honored to be your mama, Tommy. Tommy launched himself at her, wrapping his thin arms around her neck and hugging her so tightly she could barely breathe. I love you, Miss Ellie, he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. I have wanted a mama for so long, and I am so glad it is you. Eleanor held him close, tears streaming freely now, and looked up to see Gabriel watching them with an expression of such love and happiness it made her heart ache in the best possible way. I love you too, Tommy, she whispered. I love you and your papa so very much. They were married 6 weeks later in early December, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Lone Pine. Eleanor wore a new dress of deep blue silk that she had ordered from a catalog, and Gabriel wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous as he stood at the altar waiting for her. Tommy was beside him, acting as best man and taking his role very seriously. Frank stood on Gabriel's other side, and Mrs. Chen sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Several of their neighbors attended, and the church was full of well-wishers. As Eleanor walked down the aisle, her eyes locked on Gabriel's, she thought about how much her life had changed in the past 6 months. She had come to California expecting to claim an inheritance and build a new life for herself. She had not expected to be robbed, rescued, and to fall deeply in love with a cowboy widower and his son. But life, she was learning, rarely went according to plan, and sometimes the unexpected turns led to the greatest happiness. Gabriel's eyes were bright with emotion as she reached him, and he took her hands in his, holding them as if she were something precious and fragile. The preacher began the ceremony, but Eleanor barely heard the words. All she could focus on was Gabriel, on the way he looked at her like she was the most important thing in his world, on the warmth of his hands holding hers, on the promise of the future they would build together. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Gabriel did so with thorough enthusiasm, dipping her slightly and kissing her until the congregation erupted in applause and laughter. Eleanor emerged flushed and breathless, and Gabriel grinned at her, unrepentant. "I have been waiting weeks to do that properly," he murmured in her ear, and she blushed even deeper. The reception was held at the Vaughn ranch, with neighbors bringing food and drink, and there was music and dancing well into the evening. Eleanor danced first with Gabriel, then with Frank, then with Tommy, who stood on her feet and let her guide him around in a clumsy waltz that made them both laugh. As the sun set behind the mountains and lanterns were lit to push back the darkness, Eleanor stood on the porch with Gabriel's arm around her waist, watching their friends and neighbors celebrate. "Happy?" Gabriel asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Eleanor leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of him against her side. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. 6 months ago, I was crying on the steps in town, thinking my life was over. Now I have everything I could ever want." Gabriel turned her to face him, his hands on her waist. "You have given me everything too," he said seriously. "A second chance at love, a mother for my son, a partner to build a life with. I promise you, Eleanor, I will spend every day trying to deserve you." Eleanor reached up and cupped his cheek, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. "You already do," she said. "You always have." They kissed again, a sweet, tender kiss full of promise, and then Tommy was calling for them to come back to the party, and they went, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future held together. Eleanor moved into the Vaughn ranch house, bringing her favorite possessions from her aunt's place. She hired Samuel to continue running her ranch, raising and training horses that she would sell under her own name, maintaining her independence even as she joined her life with Gabriel's. It was important to her, and Gabriel understood and respected that, never trying to subsume her identity into his. Instead, they became partners in every sense of the word, helping each other, supporting each other, building something stronger together than either could have built alone. That first winter as a married couple was full of learning and adjustment. Eleanor had to get used to living with Gabriel and Tommy and Frank and Mrs. Chen, to being part of a household rather than on her own. There were moments of friction, times when she and Gabriel disagreed about how to handle something with Tommy or how to manage the ranch. But they always talked through their issues, never letting anger fester or resentment build. Gabriel was an attentive and passionate husband, and their physical relationship was a revelation to Eleanor. She had been a virgin on their wedding night, nervous and uncertain, but Gabriel had been patient and tender, making sure her first time was as pleasurable as possible. As they grew more comfortable with each other, their lovemaking became more adventurous, and Eleanor discovered a sensual side of herself she had not known existed. She loved the way Gabriel looked at her, the way he touched her, the way he made her feel cherished and desired. Spring came to the Owens Valley in a rush of wildflowers and green grass, and with it came new life. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant in April, and the joy on Gabriel's face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." Tommy was equally thrilled, immediately announcing that he wanted a brother so they could play together. Eleanor laughed and told him they would love the baby no matter what, boy or girl, and Tommy agreed but maintained his preference for a brother. The pregnancy was relatively easy, with Eleanor continuing to work on the ranch through her first and second trimesters, only slowing down in the final months when her growing belly made riding and other physical tasks difficult. Gabriel fussed over her constantly, worrying about her health and the babies, and Eleanor found his concern both touching and occasionally annoying. In December of 1883, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Gabriel, pacing outside the bedroom while Mrs. Chen and the doctor attended Eleanor, feared he would lose her as he had lost Mary. But Eleanor was strong, and finally, in the early hours of the morning, a baby's cry rang out. Gabriel burst into the room to find Eleanor exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle in her arms. "Meet your son," she said softly, and Gabriel approached with tears streaming down his face. The baby was perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and tiny, waving fists. Gabriel reached out a finger and the baby grasped it with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked. They had discussed names but never quite decided. Gabriel looked at his wife, at the woman who had brought so much love and life into his world, and said, "What about Matthew?" "It means gift of God, and that is what you both are to me," Eleanor smiled. "Matthew Vaughn, I love it." Tommy was allowed in to meet his new brother, and he climbed carefully onto the bed, staring at the baby with wide, awed eyes. "He is so small," Tommy whispered. "Was I ever that small?" Gabriel ruffled his older son's hair. "You were, and now you are a big brother, which is an important job. You will help teach Matthew everything he needs to know." Tommy nodded solemnly. "I will teach him about horses and fishing and everything. I will be the best big brother ever." The years passed in a happy blur of hard work, love, and family. Matthew grew from a baby into a toddler and then a young boy, following Tommy everywhere with the hero worship only a younger brother could have. In 1886, Eleanor gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace, after Gabriel's mother. She had Eleanor's green eyes and Gabriel's dark hair, and she was a sunny, happy child who brought joy to everyone around her. The ranches prospered, with Gabriel's horse breeding operation becoming well known throughout California and Nevada, and Eleanor's own operation growing steadily. They bought additional land, expanding their holdings, and hired more hands to help with the work. Frank eventually married a woman named Sarah who he met at a church social, and they built a house on the ranch property not far from the main house. Mrs. Chen, who had become like family, continued to manage the household with brisk efficiency, though she softened considerably with the children, spoiling them in ways she would never admit. Tommy grew into a fine young man, taking on more responsibility on the ranch and showing a natural gift for working with horses. By the time he was 16, he was training horses as well as his father, and Gabriel began to talk about eventually turning the business over to his sons when he retired. One evening in the summer of 1890, Gabriel and Eleanor sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. It was their favorite time of day, when the work was done and the children were in bed, and they had a few moments to just be together. Eleanor was 41 now, her dark hair threaded with gray, her hands permanently calloused from years of ranch work. Gabriel was 50, his hair more silver than brown, his face deeply lined from decades in the sun. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been that day in Lone Pine when their lives had intersected so dramatically. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked, her head resting on Gabriel's shoulder. "Helping me that day, taking in a stranger and changing your whole life?" Gabriel laughed softly. "Not for a single second," he said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor, you and our children. I thank God every day that Tommy asked that question, that I had the courage to ride over and see if I could help." Eleanor smiled, remembering. Not anymore, she said softly, repeating the words he had spoken to her so long ago. That is what you said. Not anymore. And you were right. My life was falling apart that day, and you put it back together. You gave me everything I did not even know I was looking for. Gabriel turned to kiss her, a soft, lingering kiss that held all the love and passion of their years together. We gave each other everything, he corrected. That is what love is, Eleanor. It is not one person saving another. It is two people choosing to face life together, to build something beautiful out of whatever materials they are given. We have built something beautiful, have we not? Eleanor looked out at the ranch, at the well-tended buildings and the healthy horses in the corrals, at the mountains rising up behind them in the fading light. She thought about Tommy, now 17 and preparing to start his own life. She thought about Matthew, a bright, curious boy of 7 who loved books almost as much as he loved horses. She thought about Grace, sweet and stubborn at 4, already showing signs of being a force to be reckoned with. She thought about the life she had built here, so different from anything she could have imagined in Boston, full of hard work and simple pleasures and deep, abiding love. Yes, she said, her voice full of contentment. We have built something beautiful, and I would not change a single thing. They sat together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, holding hands and watching the night settle over the valley they both loved. Somewhere inside the house, one of the children called out in their sleep, and Eleanor started to rise, but Gabriel gently pulled her back down. Mrs. Chen will check on them, he said. Stay here with me a little longer. So Eleanor stayed, wrapped in her husband's arms, grateful beyond measure for the twist of fate that had brought her to California, for the robbery that had left her stranded and crying on the steps in Lone Pine, for the kind cowboy who had seen her distress and decided to help. She had come west looking for a new life, and she had found so much more than she ever dreamed possible. She had found home, family, purpose, and a love that would last the rest of her days. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Tommy married a local girl named Rebecca when he was 22, and they built a house on the ranch property, eventually giving Gabriel and Eleanor 3 grandchildren to spoil. Matthew showed more interest in books and learning than ranching, and with his parents' blessing, he went to college in San Francisco, eventually becoming a lawyer. He returned to Lone Pine to practice law, serving the community and still helping out on the ranch when needed. Grace grew up to be a skilled horsewoman who shared her mother's independent spirit. She refused multiple marriage proposals, declaring that she was perfectly happy helping run the ranch and did not need a husband to complete her. Eleanor, remembering her own feelings about marriage before meeting Gabriel, supported her daughter completely, though Gabriel worried about his little girl dying a spinster. As they grew older, Gabriel and Eleanor gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operation of the ranch, trusting Tommy and the hands to manage things while they focused on enjoying their grandchildren and each other. They took to traveling occasionally, visiting San Francisco to see Matthew and his wife, taking a trip to Boston so Eleanor could show Gabriel where she had grown up, even venturing as far as Denver for a horse breeders' convention. But they always returned to Lone Pine, to the ranch and the mountains and the life they had built together. Gabriel's health began to decline when he was in his late 60s, his heart not as strong as it once was, and Eleanor fussed over him the way he had once fussed over her. He took it with good humor, joking that turnabout was fair play. They spent even more time on the porch, reminiscing about their years together, about the children and grandchildren, about all the people they had known and the changes they had witnessed in the valley. One evening, as they sat watching yet another sunset, Gabriel took Eleanor's hand and said, If I could go back and live my life over, I would not change a single thing. Every joy, every sorrow, every decision led me to you, and that makes it all worthwhile." Eleanor squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with tears. "I feel the same way," she said. "You gave me a life I never imagined, a love I never thought I would find. You saw me crying on those steps, and you rode over and promised that I would not be crying anymore. You kept that promise, Gabriel. You have kept it every day for all these years." Gabriel smiled, that same gentle smile that had captured her heart so long ago. "And I will keep it for as long as I draw breath," he promised. "I love you, Eleanor Vaughn, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, always." Gabriel lived to see his 72nd birthday, surrounded by his wife, his children, his grandchildren, and his brother Frank, who had remained his closest friend and confidant throughout their lives. He passed peacefully in his sleep on a clear autumn night, with Eleanor beside him holding his hand. The funeral was attended by half the valley, people coming to pay respects to a man who had been respected and loved by all who knew him. Eleanor stood at the graveside with her children and grandchildren around her, and she did not cry. She had shed her tears in private, mourning the loss of her beloved husband. But at the funeral, she stood straight and strong, remembering not his death but his life, all the years of love and laughter and partnership they had shared. After the service, Tommy came to stand beside her, now a man of 44 with his own children nearly grown. "Are you all right, Mama?" he asked softly. Eleanor smiled up at her stepson, who she loved as deeply as her own biological children. "I will be," she said. "I am sad, but I am also grateful. Your father and I had almost 40 years together, and they were good years, happy years. Not everyone is so blessed." Tommy put his arm around her shoulders. "He loved you so much," he said. "From that very first day. I remember it, you know. I was only 7, but I remember asking Papa why that lady was crying and watching him ride over to help you. I remember the way he looked at you even then. I think he knew right away that you were special." Eleanor leaned into her stepson, accepting his comfort. "I knew too," she admitted. "I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude, but deep down, I knew from the moment our eyes met that he was going to change my life. And he did, in the best possible way." Eleanor lived for another 12 years, staying active on the ranch well into her 70s. She saw her grandchildren grow up and start families of their own, giving her great-grandchildren to dandle on her knee. She saw Grace finally fall in love at age 42 with a veterinarian who moved to Lone Pine. And she stood beside her daughter at her wedding, delighted that Grace had found the kind of partnership Eleanor herself had known with Gabriel. She saw Matthew become a respected judge, known for his fairness and wisdom. She saw Tommy become the patriarch of the family, running the ranch with the same integrity and skill his father had shown. On quiet evenings, she still sat on the porch, though now alone, remembering the man who had shared that space with her for so many years. She talked to him sometimes, sharing news of the family, asking his opinion on decisions that needed to be made, feeling his presence so strongly it was almost as if he was sitting beside her. She never remarried, never even considered it. Gabriel had been her great love, her once-in-a-lifetime partner, and she was content to live out her remaining years honoring his memory and the life they had built together. Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1914, at the age of 75. She was buried beside Gabriel in the cemetery overlooking Lone Pine, with a simple headstone that read, "Eleanor Mitchell Vaughn, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother." At her funeral, Tommy, now in his 60s, stood before the gathered crowd and told the story of how his father and Eleanor had met, how a little boy's innocent question had set in motion a love story that had shaped all their lives. "My father saw a woman in distress," Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion, "and he rode over to help. He promised her she would not be crying anymore, and he kept that promise for almost 40 years. Their love was a gift to all of us, an example of what marriage and partnership should be. They built this ranch together, raised their family together, faced every challenge together. And now they are together again, and I like to think they are sitting on a porch somewhere, watching a sunset and holding hands, just as they always did." The family legacy continued, with generation after generation of Vaughns ranching in the Owens Valley, carrying on the traditions Gabriel and Eleanor had established. The original ranch house, sturdy as ever, remained the heart of the operation, and the story of how Gabriel and Eleanor met became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, a reminder of the power of compassion, courage, and love. In Lone Pine, they became a romantic legend, the crying woman on the steps and the cowboy who had stopped to help her. Old-timers would point out the place where Eleanor had sat that day, and they would tell newcomers the story of Gabriel Vaughn, who had seen someone in need and had not hesitated to offer help, never knowing that simple act of kindness would lead to the great love of his life. The mountains still stood guard over the valley, eternal and unchanging, watching over the people who made their lives in that harsh but beautiful land. The seasons continued their endless cycle, spring following winter, summer following spring, autumn following summer, and winter coming round again. And through it all, the Vaughn Ranch endured, a testament to the love and commitment of two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something lasting and good. The story of Gabriel and Eleanor became more than just family history. It became part of the fabric of Lone Pine itself, a reminder that even in the hardest times, hope and love could be found. That one person's compassion could change another person's life completely. That the question asked by an innocent child could set in motion events that would echo down through generations. Years later, when the great-great-grandchildren of Gabriel and Eleanor Vaughn rode across the ranch land, they would sometimes stop at a certain spot where the mountains met the valley, where the view stretched for miles in every direction, and they would think about their ancestors who had built all this, who had loved each other so deeply and so well. And they would understand, perhaps more clearly than any words could convey, what it meant to build a life with someone, to choose partnership and commitment and enduring love over everything else. The legacy of that June day in 1882, when a cowboy's son asked why a lady was crying and his father rode over to help, lived on in the thriving family, in the prosperous ranch, in the values of compassion and integrity passed down through the generations. It lived on in the very land itself, in every fence post Gabriel had set, every tree Eleanor had planted, every building they had raised together. Their love story had become woven into the story of the American West itself, a tale of hardship overcome, of new beginnings, of two people who had found each other and had built something beautiful in a wild and often unforgiving land. And so the years turned into decades, and the decades into a century, and still the story endured. Still, parents told their children about the crying woman and the kind cowboy. Still, couples sat on porches watching sunsets and holding hands, inspired by the example of Gabriel and Eleanor. Still, the mountains watched over the valley, and the valley provided for those who worked its soil, and life went on in the endless cycle of birth and death, joy and sorrow, love and loss that defines human existence. But for Gabriel and Eleanor Vaughn, there had been far more joy than sorrow, far more love than loss. They had taken a chance meeting and transformed it into 40 years of partnership, passion, and profound connection. They had raised children who became fine adults, built businesses that prospered, earned the respect of their community, and most importantly, they had loved each other with a depth and constancy that became legendary. That was their legacy, more valuable than land or money or possessions. They had loved well, and they had been loved in return, and in the end, that was all that really mattered. The story that had begun with a child's innocent question and a man's compassionate response had become a story for the ages, proof that sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, in the most unlikely circumstances, we find exactly what we need. Gabriel had found his second chance at love and happiness. Eleanor had found a home, a family, and a purpose beyond anything she had imagined. Tommy had found a mother who loved him as her own. And generations of Vaughns, yet unborn, had been given the gift of a family built on a foundation of true love and mutual respect. All because a little boy asked, "Why is that lady crying?" And his father decided to do something about it.